Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Horror Rim Live. Today, I have back with us K.A. Schultz, author, horror fan. K.A., welcome back to the Horror Rim.
Hi there, call me Kim Ann. The
Yeah,
K.A.
man.
actually stands for Kim Ann,
Yes,
originally hyphenated. That's my name.
Kim Ann. Listen, so for anybody who hasn't watched the live show that we did, we dissected X and Pearl. We're huge X and Pearl fans. Definitely check that out. And Kim Ann actually reached out to me a couple weeks ago and was like, hey, let's do The Talented Mr. Ripley and Saltburn. And I'm a huge fan of The Talented Mr. Ripley. I haven't seen it in decades. But Saltburn was one of those films that I was on my radar. I've seen it, people talk about it in a lot of the horror groups. And I was like, let me finally watch this movie. And I absolutely fucking enjoyed it. Absolutely enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. It's a scrumptious movie. I kind of think of it as a dirty Downton Abbey.
It 100% is. That's a great analogy. So today what we're going to do is we're going to do a breakdown, like we did with X and Pearl. We're going to do a breakdown of Saltburn and The Talented Mr. Ripley. We'll also do a little bit of a comparison. So Kim Ann, listen, I'm pretty sure you had the same feel when it came to Saltburn. It's a horror film, but it may not be, the stereotypical horror film. It's disturbing. It makes you feel unease, but it keeps you attached the whole way through.
I agree. It's referred to, interestingly enough, in all of its standard references as dark comedy or black comedy. And I even had to look that up because I wanted to see how they were defining that particular genre, because the word comedy makes you think that at some point you will laugh over it, whereas the actual description of that genre is really more what I would consider speculative, dark aesthetic, which in literature exists, or even like weird literature or weird fiction. And I think it falls more under that because it's definitely psychological, but then you have the lushness of the surroundings, and then you've got the lushness of the gore and the horror that is more or less suggested in many instances. But I think that it belongs to a genre that maybe in movies isn't quite perfectly described just yet, but we're getting there, because I do see more and more what seems to be crossover of horror and horror elements into mainstream films, where you've got big budget films, and we are bringing more people into this genre because it's a very hot genre right now.
It is. And one great thing about horror, and I say this a lot, horror has a lot of subgenres in it, and it has something for everyone's taste. So like when I meet someone, they say they don't like horror, I'm like, but that's a crazy thing to say, because there's so many different subgenres, and there's something in it that anybody can like. I don't like all those subgenres of horror. I'm pretty sure you don't either.
Yeah, I tend to go for, we've talked about this in our last talk, where there's a little more story driven, where they're not just peeling skin off of people like they're bananas for no particular reason. Although I love good special effects. I love when it goes there, but I want the story to justify it. I guess the same really could hold true, when people are talking about gratuitous nudity or gratuitous sex in mainstream films, that if it's there, let's have it be there for a reason. So I feel that way about horror. Give me a story, let the story fuck with my mind, and then let the visuals manifest it in a proper horror genre.
And that's the same way. The older I gotten, I need a good story. I need character development. I need to also kind of dive into the mind of the killer or the villain in the movie. Like if I don't have that backstory, if I don't have, with some point, give me an idea of who is this killer, what is their motive. Without that, I mean, it's just gore porn to me.
Yes, and of course in horror, we don't have to necessarily judge or condemn, or the bad guy doesn't need to necessarily be caught because they get away. We delight in it. We think it's just wild, like a roller coaster ride. And so we can participate in that aspect because, of course, everything in horror is like a dark allegory. So you can take it to whatever direction you want. And part of what makes horror so much fun is that there is an element of delight in all of it.
I totally agree. Now, Kim Ann, so when you first tell us a little bit about the first time you watched Saltburn, tell us about what was going through your mind.
I'm a big fan. So I'm a history person. I'm an art history person by education as well. So my lens gets fine-tuned really fast on that. And I love historical drama, historical fiction, things that reference things from ages gone by, and certainly a film as lush as this in a house that had not ever been filmed before. I mean, this residence was a real find. So there was a beauty to take in. There was an elegance to it. And of course, that makes the contrast to the salacious wickedness that much better when it's set up so elegantly, and you've got your Oxford students, and you've got your beautiful language and the literature and the way of presenting oneself, and the way that they will talk about even such as the font used on a gravestone. Oh yes, Times New Roman, so which I think was a very clever nod to American Psycho when
Yeah.
they did a scene with the business cards and they were comparing the fonts.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of fun details that make it a lush visual experience. And also it does transport me to another time, because when I envision haunted houses, it tends to go back farther still than what I might even be able to find in my neck of the woods. So I love the fact that it was set where it was, because like I mentioned Downton Abbey earlier, I'm a huge Downton Abbey fan as well.
And I agree with you. Like, one of the things that I noticed when watching this movie was how rich this family was, but also how simple. They had one medium-sized TV in the living room that they sat and watched. There was no gadgets throughout the house. It was just a simple way of living. And
Hmm.
when it came to their meals, they all had to dress up, and they had to. It was just an old time of living, even though takes place in current times.
Yeah, well, and there's an interesting phenomenon. It's been researched and written on. No matter how big one's home is, we human creatures, we do seek out our secure, cozy corners. We do have a tendency to do that. Sarah Susanka, I believe, is the architect who wrote a fabulous book on it, and it holds true for just about everybody. And yes, they will squirrel themselves away, even in their proverbial palaces, into the cozy room with the television. I thought the wonderful visual commentary on that was when they were watching The Ring horror movie.
Mhm.
In the movie,
Yes.
the Elspeth is sipping her red wine, and the father, who is about the most vacant character in that movie, is eating Nutella like a child as he's watching this horror film, and everybody is shocked, or most everyone is shocked. And then of course there we see Oliver Swift laughing away at all of this, and of course that's where Farley also catches this. This is the other student who's living there over the summer, and he's observing him, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, you think this is funny?" So there's yet another great nod to another great horror film in there to make that point.
I agree. And one thing about this movie, it's a tale of two stories. So I mean, you get the Oxford part of the movie, which it has its own dynamics and different situations and challenges for the main character. But then, he goes home to the Saltburn estate, and then you get introduced to the family and their friends, and each one of them has their own interesting quirks and story behind them.
Yes, you've got the daughter, and she has the eating disorders, and she's got a rebellious nature. You've got the failure to launch daughter who by now should be venturing out on her own. And then of course the students, and there were several references during the movie to other male students, or at least male figures, who had been at that house at preceding times. So there was obviously a revolving door having to do, no doubt, with the charismatic character that Oliver was pursuing also, so yeah, lots of suggestion of that as well.
It also brings up an interesting topic talking about that. Like, when it comes to people who grow up in privilege, wealthy, rich, they find, normal people, quote unquote, they find them fascinating. They like to sometimes feed off of that normal life, that simple life. And that's something the main character did in it. Like, he fed off of hearing the traumatic situation that Oliver was dealing with his parents. He fed off of that, the fact that he loved the fact that he was a scholarship student and he grew up with nothing. And to him, that actually made him a more interesting individual.
Right, and sort of an act of benevolence. And some of the reading that I did, there were references to what they were calling pet friendships. So obviously then in a pet friendship, you've got then the subordinate figure, and stroke it like a kitty, take care of it, bring it home, and then its coat will get nice and fluffy and shiny because it's so happy to be there. And so I think there was that element in there. And again, I think that there's just the slightest little nod to Charles Dickens and the Dickensian way of doing things. I perceive the name Oliver Swift, a rather Dickensian name, and you've got that motif, you've got the benevolence and the charity concept, and that plays into what sets everything up for disaster, because that's how they let the parasitic climber into the confines of their home, because then he can start to attack from within.
And that's something that he does. You see, you don't know. Well, I watched the movie. I did not know what his move was. I thought he had this attraction to the son. I thought he had this attraction to him, and he wanted to cling to him. But watching the movie, you start seeing him. His wheels in his head start moving, and like we brought up in a pre-interview, the first thing he did was he went after the mother. That was his first move.
Yes, and watching it in preparation for this talk, because I knew what was coming, paying attention to a few different things, which is always a fun experience in watching a show a second time like that, or a third, or whatever, is that he identified her, Oliver did, as the primary person, as also probably in terms of who was going to call the shots in the end. And he identifies her by telling her that he thinks she is fucking gorgeous. They're talking at the poolside that one time, or they're outdoors and having cocktails, and they're dressed for dinner. And that comment happens very early on in the film. So that suggests that he has already sort of created a tally in his mind who he needs to work his way through in order to get to this final person. Because of course, in the end, well, and spoiler alert for everybody, that that yes, indeed, this is where he's headed the whole time.
Yes. Now, when you were watching it for the first time, did you know where it was going? Could you see bits and pieces of what his motive was?
I definitely saw him as being the coercive predator, but that he had thought out the fine details of the encounter and everything. No, there was a slight element of surprise when the little bang, bang, bang recaps occurred at the end of the film to bring us all completely up to speed. But of course, like when he ran into the mother many years later, it's like, oh yeah, this is all part of a bigger plan. By then we got on. It didn't quite have the amazing impact of, say, Sixth Sense did, which really took a lot of people, most people, by surprise.
I agree. Now, one thing I've noticed about this movie, and we were talking about The Talented Mr. Ripley, which is an amazing movie from 1999.
Yes.
And there are some similarities between the two movies.
Yes.
And one of the things I want to bring up was, which I noticed was, both of these movies, the main characters, it talks about homosexuality, Now, and you can see the way, in 2023, how they handle it compared to 1999, which was a little more subtle.
Yes. Yeah, as a matter of fact, the more graphic elements in Mr. Ripley were indeed some violent moments, especially when it came to a head in the boat between the two men. That there were no holds barred in that confrontation. Whereas, at the end of the movie, the murder of his other partner then in the boat, in the ship, is suggested at and done only through audio and sort of after the fact imagery. So yeah, it was also, I'm going to say, because The Talented Mr. Ripley is based on a bona fide novel. If we were to take the time, which would be like a separate conversation, if we dug into the novel itself, we would probably get a much bigger, more in-depth idea of what was going on behind it, because I perceived The Talented Mr. Ripley to be much more of a psychological thriller,
Hmm.
because there was more going on under the surface, because the propriety and the behavior was fairly decent throughout, but for little bits and pieces where the issues happened, or where he was, of course, found out by the friend played by Philip Seymour Hoffman when he showed up, because he saw through Thomas Ripley immediately. So I'm thinking that maybe it's because also Saltburn was conceived as a film. We're getting everything a little bit more upfront, and the symbolism and the psychological part of it is illustrated rather than implied and representing many hundreds of pages of text.
Great. Now, one thing so when I watch both Saltburn and Talent Miss Ripley, not on to that level, but I understood I understood what that's like. And I think most human beings understand, like, you know, when you see that popular guy or girl or whatever in high school or even in life, you see how, their life is, how everything seems perfect. And you always wonder what it would be like to be in their skin. And then, I remember in my 20s, like I kind of like molded myself into that image because I knew that that was in my mind was considered successful, or this is what people like, this is the kind of people like. And that's something that we've all done, and like, so I kind of get where these characters are going, but I never took it that far.
Yeah, there's an easy charisma that seems to happen. And I'm going to say seems, because presentation of self in public is always one thing versus who somebody is when they are laid completely bare, because most all people have issues and suffer and have to grow and evolve and self-actualize over the course of an entire lifetime. But certainly when you've got the cool dudes, as both of these movies have at their core, they're radiant, they're physically beautiful, and all of the traditional artistic senses that we perceive them to be. And also they're very affectionate. And when I say affectionate, it's more of a touchy-feely way of interacting with people, because they know that they can make themselves even more irresistible through that physical contact. Not that they're conveying love, but it's almost like they know that if they put their hand on that person, the feeling of that touch is going to create a connection, like a magnetic pole, that will make them even more alluring and keep the people coming from all sides, in particular these other main characters that are hopelessly drawn to them. So very much like a sun god, and the flowers are all following.
And it's, I mean, and it's true. I mean, if you look at society, we worship attractive people. We do. Like, people who are super attractive, it's almost like I feel like they get things a little easier in life. I
Yeah.
mean, I read a stat that said, people are more likely to buy, do business, or want to be around attractive people.
Yeah, well, there's an evolutionary component to it. And so if you look back over all time, and this goes back to very fundamental things, meaning sociologically speaking, markers of good health symmetry and things like that. We are naturally drawn to that because we are creatures that do respond to all of those things. And then we have layer on top of that, you've got cultural norms and fads over time. These do change. I think we're doing some very cool things in who is being cast to do what and convey what, where we are starting to shake up some of those paradigms and allowing for some more unique, expressive looks to start to dominate. But yes, certainly, and these movies are all about that traditionally held statuesque form being so attractive. They are maxing that out to the hilt with both of
Yes.
of the men who our poor nasty predators are going after.
Because the guy from Saltburn, it seemed like to me that he didn't view people as people. He viewed people as objects.
And accessories to himself.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, in a way, he viewed women. It was just like, it's something that's in his way that he wants to conquer, and he's on to the next thing.
Yeah, I almost had a sense that his indifferentness outside of himself. So he might be like the true Narcissus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that as attracted as he might have been to a man, he would have been likewise attracted to a woman, or as unattracted as he might be towards one, he would be not as attracted to the other. Almost like a convenient indifferent. So where Oliver Swift's character was sort of like an equal opportunity sexual predator, it's how he was playing his people. Someone like the character that Oliver was pursuing was almost like laissez-faire about absolutely everybody, because he was just going to equally accept the adoration no matter who it came from.
Exactly. Now, there were some disturbing scenes in Saltburn. There was one where with Oliver and the sister, he followed her down, and yes, there was a bloody scene.
Yes, and he called himself a vampire. Now, he kind of established the horror trope right away.
Yes.
He did not need to be led into the room. He met her outside, so they met on common ground. And it's kind of interesting. I actually did a little bit of reading on it. I'm not very well versed in what is just generally called blood play. And if a girl is on her period, if menstrual blood is involved, if it is a form of blood play. It is also a form of blood play, you could say, could fall very easily into any relationship where there might be a person who is menstruating, because this happens very naturally. And what this scene did, because it was also a very sexy scene and it was beautifully filmed, is that they kind of gave it equal shrift in terms of, let's treat it as a vampiric horror scene. And of course, where is there more seduction than in a vampire scene? Mm-hmm. And then let's also treat it as this moment where menstrual blood is a non-issue, which I would guarantee you without any question in my mind that when people are drawn to each other, something like that is pretty much a non-issue. But for the fact that, you end up having things that need to be washed and stuff like that. And of course, that gets pulled into older iconography. You think about when royalty was wedded, then bedded, they had to display the bloodied sheets the next day so there could be proof that the virginity had been taken, or at least supposedly taken, stuff like that. And there are other films, if you start to reference it, that have had scenes incorporated like this, where they're dabbling a little bit, they're suggesting in it, and considering the autoeroticism that we're seeing everywhere in movies these days, and definitely in Saltburn. This is then yet another aspect of a more modern way of looking at the sexual expression when there are encounters that are not based on propriety or whatever, and it just so happens that was the situation. So I thought it was actually a pretty cool mix of horror and real life lust and desire, notwithstanding the fact that Oliver is a sexual parasite.
Yes, 100%. I was watching that scene. I was like, shit, this is pretty fucking hot. I don't know why it's hot. This is pretty fucking hot.
Yeah, it was artistically done. I mean, the whole movie is a visual fun and games, and they were very aware of it. It's a little bit like Sofia Coppola does a great job with that. And when she did the Marie Antoinette movie, the entire movie was just a joy to look at. Or Barry Lyndon is another historical drama with Ryan O'Neal. That goes back a long time. And every scene in that movie could be transposed into a classical painting that could hang on a museum wall.
And I'm going to jump over to another scene too.
Okay.
That's when Oliver was the son. He's watching the son masturbate in the bathtub, and he waits for him to leave, and then he starts licking the bathtub.
Licks the drain. It's interesting because we know exactly what's going on, that he is so obsessed, and it's to symbolize it, but yet he's really debasing himself by cleaning plumbing. I think that there's something that it is almost less the sex connection as it is he's basically just cleaning the plumbing himself, and there's something very sad and grotesque about that that I think exists far outside of the horror realm.
Yeah. Now, do you think Oliver was truly in love, or do you think he was more infatuated with him?
I think that the type of personality that they were trying to put into this character was such that the desire and obsession had no boundaries ever. And if he could have sliced, and this is really bad, but I can't think of the other character's name, and it just like it's on the side of my brain here. But if he could have sliced him open and crawled into his skin and become him, if that would have been an option, I think he would have done that as well. And sort of assimilating, and that's why I refer to him as a parasite, because he was wanting to have him, but he wanted to assimilate him because he wanted everything he had. And the funny thing is, in the end, it just seemed to manifest itself in the house and what the house represented as the all-encompassing thing that represented everything that these people were about. Because in the end, none of the people mattered anyway.
Correct. Now, one thing that you brought up to me before the interview was, both of the movies, to be talented, Mr. Ripley and Saltburn, one of the things that they were into was getting into the other person's skin or their clothes. And it was, something that they seemed like they got a power from being in that person's skin.
Absolutely. The interesting thing about that is that fashion and style really are a form of costume. And I happen to really love fashion history. And the really cool thing is that it really lends a very wonderful perspective on all of the looks that people adapt, because just about everything has already been done. And for the most part, beautifully so. And so then when they are arming themselves, with the stolen goods, because it's not just the item itself or the cut of the suit, but it's the fact that it belongs to somebody else, that they're appropriating it. They're doing it in an inappropriate way, even though it might be a proper jacket or something like that, or a proper hat. Then that makes it a little bit subordinate, and that kind of appeals to then their psychotic nature. Can I invoke right now the short scene?
Yes.
Where, okay, so this was a fun thing as I was starting to do my comparisons, and there is the end scene of Saltburn. I happen to delight in it because I, as a woman, always think it's great when it's the dude that's taking the clothes off. But that said, that said, in The Talented Mr. Ripley, there is a pivotal scene where Dickie Greenleaf is spooked. And this is about the first time he really is. It's because he comes home early, and what does he see? But he sees Thomas Ripley in boxer shorts, in his clothing. I think he's got a jacket on, a hat, he's got a scarf wrapped around his neck, and he's singing and dancing to himself. So he's preening, and he's really leeching off of Dickie Greenleaf, and it does spook Dickie Greenleaf. Well, where have we seen that before? And what pivotal scene was it that launched someone's career when they jumped around in an empty house in boxer shorts and were singing to a Bob Seger song, no less, but it was Tom Cruise and Risky Business.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back a long time. And there we have this Home Alone aspect where the cats are away, the mice are going to play. And here Tom Cruise is in his boxer shorts and singing and becoming a massive star from it. Then you've got Matt Damon doing precisely the same thing in Talented Mr. Ripley. And then fast forward, and Emerald Fennell, who wrote and created the movie, she's like, okay, you are going to not even bother with the boxers or the shirt or anything. You're going to be running around like a little giant pixie from the forest, running through the house and dancing. And I'm saying it's kind of like Jingle All the Way.
He's letting everything hang out. Yep.
I thought that was just amazing. I mean, she could have taken it one step farther, and there could have been sparkles and the lights could have been coming on as he was pointing at things, and that would have been even better. But I was delighted when I saw such obvious touch points, and it's just about progressively disrobing or putting on the wrong thing, and all of a sudden you are subversive.
Yes, and I definitely was. I enjoyed, even as heterosexual man, I enjoyed the final scene in
He's a good dancer.
He's a great dancer, but there was something disturbing about it. As someone's a horror fan, there was something absolutely disturbing, because it was almost like watching the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where Leatherface is doing his dance with his chainsaw, with his celebration dance. It was watching this individual who has completely murdered a whole entire family, and he gets away. He wins everything. He gets everything that he ever wanted. He gets it. And now you get to watch his celebration dance for a good 5 minutes.
Yes, and I'll take it back even farther in time to ancient folk tales, fairy tales, and such, where you have the sprites. You've got the little woodland creatures. Oftentimes, clothes are optional in how they have been perceived over time. Think about the little cherubs. Think about the little arrows shooting as arrows. They're sort of like the little wicked cherubs, and he was very much like something straight out of A Midsummer's Night's Dream, like what they were portraying in that very pathetic birthday party scene for him. Mm-hmm. And he has now literally become the wickedly gleeful sprite that has now taken over the chateau.
Yes. Now, there was one scene that made me cringe in this movie, and it wasn't a blood scene, it wasn't the dancing around naked scene. The scene that made me cringe was when, I can't think of his character's name, but the main son, his interest, he surprises him and he takes him home to see his mom. And at that point, I realized he was lying about everything. And I was like thinking, oh my God, how is he going to get himself out of this? And once that guy found out that everything he said was a complete lie, when a sociopath or a psychopath is cornered, they're at their most dangerous. And at that point, you knew that he had to wipe every single bit. I knew at that point that he was dead, because he had to get rid of his evidence. This is the one person that knew who he truly was.
For sure. And it was a great scene, and I liked how that scene was played, because there was good tension. I mean, it had very much sort of a action suspense movie moment. And again, this pulls back nice to mainstream action film and mainstream appeal, because there was the horror element was about the deception. So yeah, that was it was well done, and it opened up our eyes as the viewer. The stories go, in fact, this deep.
Yes.
Including the parents. They were completely duped.
Yes. Because I was like thinking to myself, like, what the fuck would I did in that situation? And I don't think I would have handled it as well as he did.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that it was, and I think it's because the charismatic, godlike being that the love interest was for Oliver Swift, is that he also happened to be very bright, quick thinking. There was definitely a suggestion of him being intellectual, sense of humor, all of those elements. So he's also thinking on his feet, and the way that he kind of played along, because that way he could get more information, was about his cleverness, which of course added to his allure.
Yes, I agree. And
So I want to also, I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
You go.
Well, yeah, there's another scene. Can we talk about the burial scene, the graveyard scene too?
Oh yes, yes, yes. The fucking grave scene.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the reasons I want to bring that up is because I think, as a horror fan, and I tend to like very broad spectrum horror, and that includes horror that goes very intellectual, very dark, what is often called like some of the French horror, like Martyrs, for instance, that kind of a film. But there is a movie, couple of movies that I know from past years that I want to draw some parallels to, because as a horror fan, love also when I am challenged, if I'm watching something, meaning, do I get it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it freaking me out? Am I impressed with the effects? That kind of a thing. And so that scene, I found myself thinking, oh my gosh, is he going to unearth this casket?
Oh yes,
Is he going to climb in there? Is there going to be some necrophilic activity? Because that, of course, draws and crosses some very solid lines into some very intense horror that has actually been touched on many, many times. I mean, for one thing, horror generally has to do with life versus death. And because in life there are endless incarnations, and in death there are endless incarnations. You know, whether you're talking about a demon character, or a zombie, or someone or someone resurrected in the form of a vampire, you know, death has so many incarnations. And also the idea of corpse and corpse mutilation and disrespect to a corpse and that sort of thing, that falls into some of the more extreme horror genres. And there happens to be a movie, late 80s, that came out. It was a German horror film called Necromantic. Have you ever heard about that?
I have not.
It is probably the saddest and darkest horror film I've ever seen, and it specifically has to do with a couple that had a fetish interest in corpses, and the whole movie dealt with that. And so this movie suggests it. It suggests it. What it also does, though, it pulls in very time-honored mythology, and that has to do with let's say Hades, the god of the underworld, and Persephone, his wife, when she returns to the earth, the spring comes, and that is all basis of fertility cycles and celebrations, and the spring and the dying of the winter and the death, again another incarnation of death. So what he's basically doing is, it's like he's fertilizing the soil in a gesture that I think you can pull back to something like Necromantic, which is an extreme German horror film. You can also take it even farther back to classical mythology, because it starts to pull that in. And then you fast forward a little bit, you go to the late 80s, and then you've got the film The Begotten, which is also a haunting film, and that draws almost solely from ancient mythology, where you've got a god character, you've got a Mother Earth character, and then you have an offspring character, and all of the violence that happens therein. So I think that his fertilization scene, whatever you want to call it, for maybe some horror fans, didn't maybe go enough. It was a little bit sort of romancing the grave and romancing the sadness. For all mainstream viewers, it's going to be, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm seeing this. And then on the other hand, it creates a lot of buzz, because buzz these days is the best form of advertising.
It is. It is. Now, talking about horror fans, when this movie first came out, this is why I waited so long to see this movie. When this movie first came out, I follow a lot of horror groups on social media. And when this movie came out, I saw this all over the place. Saltburn, Saltburn, Saltburn.
Mhm.
And horror fans did not like this movie. Horror fans were pretty crucial when it came to this movie. And like, and after watching it, I'm like, wow, I'm completely dumbfounded because I love this movie. I mean, I absolutely love this movie.
That's so interesting, and I have to wonder because I did not dig into it early on. Did the horror fans also have a sense that it maybe just sort of dabbled in a lot of the tropes and didn't quite go as far enough as they would have wanted to satisfy the horror experience? Or can I'm curious what
Yeah,
some of the issues would have been.
I'm not sure, but this is my hypothesis. I mean, if
Mhm.
I would think from, I think there wasn't enough blood and guts. There wasn't enough visceral
Yes.
aspects to it. I mean, you know, in the horror community right now, more is better. You know, and
Yes.
like right now we're in the Terrifier uh,
Yes.
realm of horror, which
Yes.
is pushing the boundaries to the fucking extreme.
Yep.
And I think if you don't do that, when it comes to a lot of horror fans, and I'm not even talking about a hardcore horror fan. I'm just talking about because most horror fans are casuals. That the biggest population of horror fans are not hardcore; they're casuals. They're people
Mm.
who dabble in horror every once in a while. And I think we gotten to the point right now when it comes to horror with the biggest group of horror fans, which are the casuals. They need to see something completely over the top in
Mhm.
order for them to call it something great. Or this is a great horror movie.
Yeah. So, for instance, the bathtub scene was done art film style, I'm going to say, very
Yeah,
mainstream, where you basically just saw the after effects. You did not see the blade slicing through the wrist.
correct.
Had this been more straightforward horror presentation, there could have been an extreme close-up of a blade running up the
Yes.
wrist, and you would not have known who was holding the blade. And you would still be left to wonder, did he do it? Did she do it? And I actually think it's kind of 50-50, whatever conclusion a person wants to draw on that. Um, so yeah, my impression as a horror fan, but I think maybe some of my Downton Abbey love was playing a role in that too, because I could appreciate it that much. But it's like I had the sense that it was dabbling in horror and it was teasing the viewers because we as the viewers were teased through the whole damn film, just
Yes.
as everybody was teased by Oliver Swift. And so I
Mhm.
think that that might also just be kind of on par with the intent of the message that was being conveyed to every single viewer. Now, that said, maybe there's a director's cut somewhere with some very bad graphic scenes
Yeah.
that might eventually show up, or bad or good, that they may have dabbled with that a little bit. And in order to garner the big following and to grow that following and keep it from being like an MA rating, right?
Mhm.
Then kind of stick to that level.
I agree. Now, I mean, because that menstrual scene, him going down on a woman while she was on a period, that was fucking pretty graphic to me. I thought that was pretty
Yeah, yeah.
graphic.
Yeah, well,
But I don't
I
know.
think you had a lot of artful lighting.
Yes.
A little bit like when that horrible 50 Shades of Grey came out. It was a horrible book. It was a horrible movie. But, I like the people that acted in it. I think there's some good work in there. But, the sex scenes were just pure art scenes. You just had lovely views, lovely angles, lovely lighting. And I think that despite that scene, the oral sex scene in the garden out there, I thought it was about as artistically done as it possibly could have
Yeah.
been.
I mean, even though like the bathtub scene where he was looking at what's it called, it was done beautiful. It was shot beautiful. It was
Oh yeah,
disturbing, but it
look
was
how
shot
they
beautiful. The
totally.
angle, they didn't show anything.
Yes.
It was just let your mind go and think where it was happening.
Exactly. Yes, and look at how they spotlighted once again the Adonis-like form of the dude in the tub. I mean, that
Yes,
was quite lovely.
yes. So, yes, let's shoot over to right now. What are some similarities that you saw between the two movies, Talented Mr. Ripley and Saltburn? Besides the ones we stated already.
Yeah, yeah. I think, you know what, I think we've covered a lot of the points, but I think that that aside from some of the uncanny similarities that are terribly specific, I think that what's so intriguing is how one moment you can like the perpetrator and find something to sympathize with, and then in the next moment find him a little bit vile. And I think it even affects perception of visuality, because I found myself alternating between, let's say in Saltburn, thinking that that the fellow who played him, Brian, uh,
Mhm.
was either like, this is a super hot dude, or this is not a good looking guy, or look at him here. Same thing, Matt Damon. And I
Yes,
think Matt Damon is in particular very much a chameleon. I think that he has fabulous visual presence, and then whether it's interpreted as a handsomeness or a hot look is so contingent on what he's conveying in a moment. And I think it's really fascinating as a viewer to find my mind and my sensibilities constantly shifting alongside with what the character is doing and where he's at and what's happened to him, or when there's a moment of greater understanding.
listen. I didn't even think of that, but like I agree with you when it comes to Oliver. When you see him in Oxford, he for a college student, he looks old. He looks tired. And then you start seeing him getting into that house, and you start seeing him moving, and his looks. The glasses go away. But by the way, the glasses completely go away, and you can just see he becomes more attractive. It's like he starts walking around with his shirt, and he's muscular. Like he just starts as the pieces and the wheels and the start moving. You can see the confidence gain on him, and you can see his appearance change. You're muted.
So kudos to the guys for being able to convey the subtle changes as they did, as they were accruing in their persona. And
Hmm.
especially, I'll invoke again the sexual parasite that Oliver Swift was, that he was able to kind of, all right, the shoulders back. It's sort of like the feathers are getting fluffed, and
Yes,
confidence is building. And that's a pretty cool thing, because that's a pretty subtle thing to be able to convey.
I 100% agree. All right, Kim Ann, where can everyone find you?
Where can you find me?
Yes.
All right. So, yeah, I'm so sorry about my earpiece. So, I am active on Instagram, KA Schultz _writer. I am also on X. My website is www.butterflybroth.com. That's just written as one word. And at my social media, I am also on TikTok, and I do a lot of cross posting, so you can find me there. But if you get to my link tree, you're going to be able to get to links to podcasts, to my books. I've got my 2 books right here. I've got Ethereum and Gothic. And I have something in the works that will be a holiday-based collection that I'll be putting out
Ooh,
later this year. So I am being very astute with technology and social media, and keeping myself as findable as I can be.
love it. I love it. So, Kim Ann, all right, next month, let's do another one of these, but let's do something a little more mainstream for the mainstream audience. How
Okay?
about if we do Halloween and Friday the 13th? Jason and Michael Myers.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Well, and you'll have to, of course, now, if you're going to have us research Halloween, how many Halloweens are we now supposed to look at?
Let's go. Let's base it off of. I'm trying to think.
The Rob Zombie ones, or do we want to just go old
No,
school? We'll go old school. We'll go to the
let's go
originals.
old school with the originals. Let's sit with the originals. We're not going to
Yeah,
do
like,
any of the remix or anything. We're going to go with the originals.
yeah, like the absolute original Halloween I saw as a teenager on a date, and I kid you not, my date flew out of his chair at that sidewalk jump scare. And I'm laughing. So the horror girl thinks it's the funniest thing in the world, and my date is just like nearly on the floor.
Now,
So,
did he
okay,
ever
I'll do some
hear from you
homework.
again?
Pardon
I would
me?
say, did that poor guy ever hear from you again?
Well, he's part of a long distant past. No, if you're a horror person, you need to have people pretty tolerant. And of
Yeah.
course, here and there in family and friends, you do find your fellow horror fans and friends, and that's also kind of interesting. Who else has an affinity for this, right?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Listen,
Well, I'll get busy on my homework.
yes, we're gonna do that next month. Listen, everybody, follow Kim Ann. Grab her new books as well. Follow her on Instagram. She's pretty active, actually. And also, too, check out Saltburn. Listen, for the horror fans who are like me and heard people say, "Oh, this is a shitty movie" or whatever. No, go watch it for yourself. I'm telling you, it might be the best movie I've seen this fucking year, to be honest. It is that good. It's such a good movie.
Yep. I think it's good, and I think we're going to keep seeing more stuff come out because horror is hot right now.
Yes, and I hope horror creators, which a lot are in the indie scene, but I hope even in Hollywood, bring us something new. Yes, the cliche horrors are fine and so forth, but let's mix things up. Let's try something new, like a Saltburn, every once in a while.
Awesome. Thank you, Travis, for having me. This
No
was so
problem.
much fun.
Yes, fun as always. Everybody, thank you for coming to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce. That's Kim Ann Schultz. We'll see you next time. Next month is going to be Freddy. I'm sorry, we're not doing Freddy. Jason versus Michael Myers. We're going to do the breakdown of that.
Sounds
All right.
good.
Y'all have a good night. Take care.